Welcome back, everybody, to a live edition of the DCL Duo podcast brought to you by My Path Unwinding Travel. And Sam, it's a doozy today. We're going to be talking a different kind of cruising, a little river
Yeah.
cruising with our friend Karen. Yeah.
I am so excited.
Hello.
We just mentioned My Path Unwinding Travel, but of course, who better to talk about My Path Unwinding Travel than Karen? Welcome to back
Hi,
to the show, Karen.
everyone.
Yeah. We're so happy to have you back, Karen. As Brian mentioned, we're going to talk a different kind of cruising. We're going to talk river cruising tonight. Before we dive into the topic, we've got to let Karen reintroduce herself to the audience. It's been a few months, I think, since we've had you on the show, Karen, but why don't you tell folks your cruising background, which is super, super extensive, and a little bit about My Path Unwinding Travel. Yeah.
Thank you. So great to be back, Brian and Sam. Thanks for having me. So I am the owner of My Path Unwinding Travel. We are a full service boutique travel agency. We like to say that Disney is at the heart of everything we do, but we do so much more than that. So we all kind of speak that common Disney language. We are now celebrating our 9th year in business, which is crazy to me. We have 15 advisors coast to coast. You've seen many of them on your show. My very first cruise was on my honeymoon, which was over 30 years ago now.
I love
And
that.
my travel agent at the time was actually my cousin, who told Harv, my now husband, that if he took me on a cruise for a honeymoon, that would be the only way I would ever want a vacation. And I guess those were wise words. And yeah, now we've been on, I can't even say, probably over 30 cruises total, I would say. We are somewhere between Platinum and Pearl on Disney Cruise Line, which is definitely the cruise line that we've experienced the most. But we've been on most of the major cruise lines and now starting to really branch out into some of the more specialty cruise lines and river cruising.
Awesome.
Nice. Well, we had our first taste of river cruising this past December and really enjoyed it and have been eyeing some things in the river cruising space. So excited to talk to you about that. You just got back, though, well, maybe not just, but about a month or so ago now, or 2 months ago. So now you got back from a big river cruising conference. So we're excited to hear what you learned there. Let's start off with what is river cruising, right? I think people have a general idea of it, but when we talk about river cruising, like what is it and what are the biggest distinctions between it and sort of ocean cruising?
Absolutely. Yes, I did just get back from the ASTA River Cruise Expo, which is the American Society of Travel Advisors, a really amazing event where the river cruise lines bring their ships to a city. This year it was in Amsterdam, and there were 9 cruise lines and 13 ships represented. And all of the travel advisors sleep on board the ships for the most part. Some did stay in hotels, but we slept on board. We got to dine around all the different ships, tour them all, and then take a river cruise. So that was an incredible event to really learn about some of the key differences. What is river cruising? I mean, it is a small ship experience where you are floating through the highways of old, right? So the highways of Europe were the rivers. So we are floating on calm, gentle waters, not on open ocean, and going, which makes a really big difference for people who say they don't like to cruise because of motion sickness. Um,
Mhm.
Floating through the different destinations. Most river cruises are in Europe, but there are river cruises in Southeast Asia. There's river cruises in Egypt. River cruising in Colombia, South America is becoming popular, and there's some new cruise lines going there. And then there's actually river cruising right here in the United States.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. We have
There's
one about
some
200
on the
miles south of us. Yeah.
yeah, on the Columbia
Yeah.
River, and there, of course, there's some on the Mississippi River. There's some of the major rivers in the U.S. Tell us, Karen, what are like the big players in the river cruising industry for American tourists?
That's a great question. And I would say that almost everyone who has watched television or been exposed to any kind of media in the last, I don't know, 10 years probably knows about Viking. Viking has done a tremendous job promoting river cruising. They had some beautiful ads running during Downton Abbey back in the day.
That's right.
And I think that got a lot of people's attention for all the people that loved watching Downton Abbey on PBS. And Viking had these great commercial spots on there promoting their river cruise. And they are probably the biggest river cruise company on every river with so many ships. They actually I have some notes here. They have over 90 ships, Viking does, which is really crazy. But their ships are all most of them are virtually identical, right? So they all have different names, but all the ships are virtually identical. There's just so much you can do creatively with a river cruise ship. So Viking has the ships are very standard, and most cruise lines within their line, their ships are standard. But Viking is very popular. Another one that is popular is AMA Waterways, which I know the two of you sailed on as part of their partnership with Adventures by Disney. There is Avalon, which is a river cruise company that's part of the Globus family. So many people know Globus because they provide land tours really around the world. And their river cruise line is Avalon. Tauck is one that I'm very excited about. I spent a great deal of time with Tauck back in March out of Amsterdam. They are also a guided vacation company that is about to celebrate 100 years. And they have some extensive offerings about river cruising on river cruise lines. Let's see, who else do we have? One of the up-and-comers that I'm excited about is Riverside. There was a cruise line called Crystal. And some of you out there might have heard about Crystal. They had ocean and river ships. And they sadly went bankrupt during COVID. So Riverside actually bought Crystal Cruise Line's river ships and are now operating them as a luxury cruise line. And then I think one of the other ones that folks talk about here in the US is Uniworld, which is kind of an ultra luxe river cruise line as well. So there's so many more, but those are the main ones to touch on.
Nice. What you just mentioned Uniworld as ultra luxe. Like, how do you think about these other cruise lines and where they stack? Is like, I mean, Viking doesn't strike me as like budget. It feels like a pretty good cruise line. So like, are they all sort of skewing toward that luxury end, or is there more economy focused river cruises that you've seen?
So I think it's very interesting because Viking is among travel professionals is considered more mass market, especially in their river cruise product. They also have an ocean product that is, I think, a bit higher. I know is a bit higher end. Viking has they definitely promote themselves as luxurious, and their price point is pretty steep, but their offering may be not quite up to as luxurious as a true luxury passenger might expect. And one of the reasons for that is that they have 190 passengers on their river ships. And as opposed to, let's say, a Tauck that has a max of 130 and more often an average of 110. And you can think about that. That is a significant difference on a ship that size. Because the dining room spaces and the public spaces really are not that much different. And like Riverside, for example, has about 110 passengers compared to Viking's 190. So Avalon, I would say, is a nice option, budget point wise. They may have less included than some of the other lines. But really, it pays to take some time to compare several options to see what's the right fit for you. What do they include? Because that varies. What's the vibe on board? Because that varies. And then make a determination, based on budget, etc.
Yeah. What's the demographic for river cruising? Obviously, we did an Adventures by Disney, which I think the demographic ranges very broadly from, grandparents to, it's a very multi-generational cruise, I would say, on Adventures by Disney on AMA. But what are sort of do the other cruise lines that are obviously less family oriented, do they skew older, and what are the exceptions to the rule there?
Sure, great question. So, you know, river cruising has traditionally been considered a vacation for retirees late into their well into their retirement, not these folks that are like, early retirees. And I think that Adventures by Disney has helped change some of that dialogue. I remember when they were rolling out the Adventures by Disney River Cruise, I kind of thought they were crazy because I was just like, it's not an ABD, and it's not for families, and it's not for young people. But because of their partnership with AMA, where they have connecting rooms and they have rooms that can hold 3 or 4 people, it has helped get the word out that river cruising is for younger people. So it really depends on the cruise line and the itinerary. So, like, Viking has now gone adult only. You cannot bring a child under
Oh,
18 on Viking
Wow.
at all. Riverside is very interesting because they are a luxury cruise line and they allow children as young as 6 months on board.
wow.
Wow.
And not everybody loves that, right? But when you think about a luxury hotel brand, Four Seasons and Ritz
Yeah.
Carlton, they allow children, and Riverside is trying to be more of that floating luxury hotel experience. So
Mhm.
it's very interesting. So again, you have to kind of really dive in because I remember chatting with Mikkel a little bit, who's been on your show, and it was sailed on Riverside that um, I think she was taken aback that there was a family with very young children on board with her.
Yeah.
And so you really have to know that could happen when you're on Riverside. And if you don't want that, then maybe choose a different line. So
Yeah.
it really will vary.
Yeah. What
You
are the
mentioned
ones that
earlier.
sorry, I
You
just
mentioned
wanted to
earlier. Go ahead,
go ahead,
Sam.
Brian. I was just going to ask. I know you've mentioned to us Talk Bridges, right? And as I understand, that's kind of their, I want to say, like, competitor to Adventures by Disney, and they're sort of more family focused. I'm curious, am I right about that? Am I remembering that correctly?
Yeah, so Talc, as I
Or
mentioned,
Tauk? Sorry,
has
I'm
been
saying
a
it wrong.
company around for 100 years. Next 2025 will be their 100th anniversary. And I think it's been about 20 years ago, started Talc Bridges, which is their family oriented product for both land and river cruising. So they have a subset of their river cruises that are really geared towards families. And I would
Mhm.
say, in the family space, only Adventures by Disney and Tauk really focus and have a well-developed program. Uniworld also has a generations program, but I think it's very limited. They just have very few, like they have fewer offerings. Um, and so, that is a consideration. But Tauk has a great family product for river cruising, and they also currently sail a few more places in Adventures by Disney.
Mm.
So for folks that either have sailed on ABD and have already done the Seine, the Rhine, and the Danube, or are wanting something different, Tauk does those, but they also do the Rhone, so down into southern France, and they
Oh,
have a Portugal itinerary for families on the Douro, which is extremely popular and exciting. And I mean, they do a really really nice job. And I think there's some things about Tauk's ships that are better for families than AMA, and then there might be some things on AMA that are better than Tauk. So it's just kind of again evaluating what's important to your family.
What are some of those things? And then the other question I'm curious about is, so ABD with AMA, you mentioned earlier, had some rooms that would sleep 3 and 4, and that can be a barrier for families, right? If I've got to get 2 river cruise rooms, it's not an inexpensive proposition. I don't know if you can book those same rooms outside of an ABD on an AMA, or if there are other ships out there that are sleeping, 3 and 4 in kind of a more standard cabin configuration, like AMA is. So curious about that, and what are some of those, like, back and forth between. We loved AMA. You've been talking to us about Tauk, so like, yeah, what are some of the family friendly things on those 2 lines?
Sure. So, one of the things to remember about river cruising is that in general, the price is going to be the same even if you have a third and fourth person in the room. There might be a minimal amount of savings. Usually, that savings is based on it being a child under 12 rather than it being the third person. So, on an ocean cruise, we're used to the third, fourth, and possibly fifth
Yeah.
passenger having a reduced fare. On most of these river cruise lines, that is not going to be the case. The price is going to be
Okay.
the same if you have 3 or 4, or therefore if you have 2 rooms.
hmm
So AMA
Okay.
has a limited number of connecting rooms, and there's just a few that actually connect, and they're not the least expensive. They're not the suites, but they are kind of a little bit on the higher range. So if having a true connecting room is important to you at this time, AMA Waterways is the only river cruise line that you can sail on.
Yeah.
Tauk does
Okay.
not have a true connecting option right now. Possibly in the future, we will see that with them. And I'll be really
Yeah.
excited if they
Well,
announce
and
that.
well,
But
and
one of the
for
things I want to point out, go
yeah.
ahead.
No, no, I was gonna ask if you think though, I think river cruising, at least from the one experience that we have, to me, is not the time to bring an infant on board. I'm just gonna be honest and say that I actually don't think that would be the right kind of vacation. To me, it feels like older elementary might work, but middle school, high school are probably the better times to do river cruising as a family. And I was just
You're,
curious
you're
if you.
skipping to the end of the book here, Sam, because
Oh, I'm
the end of
sorry.
the last question here is who's it for? So, but let's go ahead. You've already teed it up. So, yeah, Karen, before we get into the particulars of what it's like, who's it for?
Well, because that way, then the adjoining room is a little less important, right? If you
Yeah.
have older kids, that's where I'm
Well,
getting.
that's true, and that is true. And listen, my very first river cruise was also on Adventures by Disney on AMA Waterways, and I think initially when ABD came out, their minimum age was maybe even 6 the first year, or right when they were trying to promote it. And then they reduced it down to 4, but I think their recommendation is still 5 or 6 and older. But on our river cruise, we did see a 4-year-old, a family. It was a multi-gen family. There was
Hmm
several children together, and they had a lovely time. I mean, I just have the sweetest photo of the 4-year-old, holding hands with her cousin, who she was staying with her sister, and holding the ABD sign. And they all sat together as a family and they had a lovely time. So I think it's just a matter of expectations and itinerary. In general, I do think river cruising is tends to be a bit active because you're not going to have a
hmm
sea day. You're going to have every day in port typically for at least some of the day. But on the other hand, you also overnight in some ports. So the pace can kind of be a little set up to you. Um, in general, on Tauk and ABD, we do tend to see older elementary to teenage to even high school graduation and college age kids traveling with their families, because that tends to be the time when people are ready to take their families to Europe.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just a long
Ye-
flight.
Yeah,
Right.
it is. It is.
It sure is.
The flight's almost more expensive than the cruise to get to Europe these days. So
These
especially
days,
for a
yeah.
family.
These days.
Ugh.
Yeah. You mentioned talking about costs here. We'll ask costs really at the end, but I wanted to ask about inclusions. So, when people go on ocean
Right.
cruising, different lines, different kinds of inclusions, but what can folks expect on a river cruise would generally be included?
So again, this is going to vary based on the cruise line. At minimum, every cruise line gives you a room and gives you food at minimum, right? So you have whatever room you're in, and then you have your food in the main dining room, and usually some kind of some alternative place to grab something or other, but that the extent of that is going to vary.
Yeah.
More then from there, river cruise lines vary. So some include excursions, but then you have to look at that closely. Viking, for example, includes an excursion in every port, but they're the very basic kind of bus or walking tour that's like an hour and a half, super surface overview where you're probably not going to go inside anything, but just kind of see it all as you wave. And if you want anything more interesting or more in depth, you will pay for that. AMA
Okay.
Waterways tends to have a choice of excursions included in every port. Tauk has a choice of excursions included in every port. And for AMA and Tauk, you might see an afternoon and morning even excursion both offered. So, and Avalon depends on the itinerary. There's some that have none, and some that have some, and some that have some, but they might sell out, and then you have to pay for others. So it really kind of starts getting confusing between all the lines. Riverside that I talked about, they have this, very a bit frustrating offering in that they want you to book what is their all-inclusive, which is all of the excursions and the beverages, which we'll talk about. But you can book it just the beverages and not the excursions, just the excursions and not the beverages, or with none of it. So every cruise line has different price points. And then beverages also varies. You can have, like on AMA Waterways, they offer wine and beer and like a sparkling wine with lunch and dinner and an hour-long cocktail hour every day of the cruise. Tauk is fully inclusive, basically open bar the whole time. You don't ever have to sign a slip or write, charge anything to your room at all, unless it's like a spa or laundry. Viking has a beverage package you can buy. So again, it really, really varies based on, the cruise line.
And
It seems like in general they include more than your average large ship cruising, but obviously there's a lot of variation as you mentioned. I think the biggest thing is excursions, right? Like generally large ship cruising, no excursions are included, whereas with river cruising, it's the general rule is at least some walking tours are probably included and sometimes more than that.
well, AMA seems to
Exactly.
offer, because when we were on AMA seemed to offer, like when I was looking at this, like, yeah, like you said, Karen, like kind of three choices. Like, and generally it seemed to be like low activity, moderate activity, high activity. They had
Hiking,
they had
Right.
bikes. Like some of their ships had bikes that you could just either go on a biking excursion, which would be the
Yes.
high activity excursion for the day, or you could just check them out when they're not in use and go tour around the town. So yeah, the excursions are interesting.
And
I
that
think
gives
they're
you
very
a good
interesting.
clue. Yeah. And that gives you a good clue about the demographic on board
Mhm.
too. Is like, first of all, do they have bikes on board? Viking has no bikes on board. And then Riverside has e-bikes. So, which I would have loved when I was on my AMA cruise and was kind of struggling a little bit on my bike tour. I blame the bike, but it could have been the rider.
Could be the rider.
But looking at
Well,
those excursions, right? So, how active are they? And like Avalon, for example, has some river cruises that are marketed specifically as active adventure. And so those are going to be more appealing to a younger audience. So there's so many variations to really check out. It's a lot more than just, oh, I want to go on this cruise line, on this river, on this date. You kind of have to dive
Yeah.
in a little deeper to understand really what you're getting.
Well, and my sense of river cruising, just to put it out there, we've been on one, so I can't overgeneralize.
Yeah, Karen's
You have
been
more,
on
you've been on more.
ton of them.
But I don't see, like, ocean cruising. You can do go on the board of the ship and go from activity to, or you can just sit by the pool all day. Like, the aim of ocean cruising seems to be, let's all just relax, right? I mean, outside of Europe, like going to Norway and stuff like that, Alaska, where people expect a little bit more activity. But in general, like that ocean cruising in the Caribbean is kind of relaxing. River cruising was like up at 7, get breakfast, you're headed out on an excursion, you might come back for lunch, there might be another excursion in the afternoon. You had moments of relaxation and
It's a lot of
opportunities to relax.
sightseeing. Yeah,
But it was
at
a
least in
lot more
Europe,
like,
yeah.
the ship isn't the destination, right? The cities it's stopping in are the destination. Is that fair, Karen, do you think, for river cruising? Or is there
I absolutely think it's
Yeah.
I absolutely think it's fair. I mean, the river cruise is more of a floating hotel concept, right? It's taking you where you want to go without having to pack and unpack. And for most places in Europe, you dock and you're right in the town. Now, for other places, you might need to drive a little bit, a short ways or further ways. But in general, you're way closer to the destination that you're there to see than on an ocean cruise, right? Where you might dock in Civitavecchia and have to, drive into Rome. That's, nowhere near. But so you have more time to really immerse. Many of these river cruises, even if you're doing an excursion, let's say in the morning, then you have time to just wander, which is really what you want to do, I think, in some of these European towns. Just really soak it in, shop a little, have some local cuisine or a drink, or just sit and people watch, in the square or whatnot. And that may be why for some people doing a river cruise that doesn't include any excursions is fine, because they really just want to use it as that floating hotel and just choose what they want to experience in each destination. But most of the time you're going to get off, right? There's not a Nassau where you're like, oh, I'm just going to stay on and enjoy the ship. Although there's some great amenities on board some of these ships, for sure. But it's, and there's times where, when you're floating down the river itself is the destination. Yes. There's portions of the Rhine, for example, that is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and you're learning, you're seeing castles floating by and whatever, and beautiful scenery, and you may have a cruise director narrating some of what you're experiencing as you're sailing down the river or going through locks. Did you guys enjoy the locks when you were on your river cruise? I mean, I think that's one of the most fascinating experiences.
We had one afternoon where we were sailing, and because most of the time we were only sailing at night, right? So we couldn't see anything. Even if you were in a lock, you couldn't see it. It was pitch black, right? But there was one afternoon where we went through actually a couple of locks, and that was really cool on the Danube to see them,
Yes.
I wanted to pull up this comment because I think it speaks directly to what we're talking about right now. And I will just say, I will set some expectations here. There's no Broadway theater on board these ships. They put on entertainment. There are performers. They brought on local performers for our ABD. It was very lovely in the evening. Maybe before we answer the activities question, we should describe a little bit better the spaces on the ship, because I think that also drives kind of what they're capable of doing. And so, I mean, my experience on AMA, they had, as you said, Karen, they had a main dining room. They actually had one sort of specialty chef's table restaurant off the back of the ship we were on. And then there was a lounge that was like right above the main dining room that had a bar in it. And that lounge tended to be...
It's all purpose, basically.
It was all purpose. Yeah, that was where the entertainment was. That was where people hung out before dinner. That's where you got a drink before dinner. You could get, you mentioned earlier, the eating small bites. They had tapas there that it was right above the kitchen. You could order some plates of food throughout the day if you wanted it. Although we didn't discover that until too late. But anyway, but like, is that kind of a similar setup on the other ships, Karen? Where they get big main dining room, big lounge area, and then most of the rest of the ship is just devoted to rooms?
They're all extremely similar, and it became so apparent when we were, walking through 13 different ships that were all docked side by side. There's just so much you can do. Now, on the Danube, as you know, there's now a couple of ships that are double wides. For
Yeah.
example, the Ama Magna, that has more space. But on the Rhine, for example, all the ships can only be as wide as those locks. Just like, how we used to have the Panama Canal restrictions for, the size ship that could go through. So every river cruise ship has essentially 3 decks that passengers would be on. One is kind of at water level, and is like those cabins sometimes are called swan view, where your window is a little bit kind of like my window behind me, right? And imagine
A
that,
little
like,
underwater.
it's very much like that, and then you're seeing like the water line there. Although Talc has some double height rooms on the first floor, so you actually have a full height window. It's a very unique
Wow.
option. And most often the dining room is on that level. It might not always be, but most often it's somewhere on that level. On deck 2, you're going to have a lounge, and as Brian said, as both of you said, multi-purpose, more staterooms. On deck 3, there's more staterooms. And then there'll be some other kind of space. On Ama, on the back of the ship, was the chef's table. On Talc, in that same general area on the rear of the ship, is a restaurant called Arthur's, which I think is brilliant because it is basically all day casual dining. Just pop in the morning for your coffee and continental breakfast, and then starting like lunch through late evening, you can get a burger, sandwich, salads, charcuterie, hot pretzel, whatever, anytime. And I think for families traveling with kids, that's a brilliant, or for just adults that just don't want to eat a 3-course meal in the dining room anymore. That's just a great option.
Yeah.
On
I wonder if
Viking, they use that space for more suites. So
yeah. I want to throw up this photo of the top deck that you sent us, Karen, because I also think it puts in perspective like the size of these ships. This is like this is the
width.
This is the width, and you can imagine rooms on either side and a hallway down the middle. The top deck's also got some activities on board, but some of them have pools. I can see here this little golf course and shuffleboard, and in the back there you can see kind of the lounging sort of space where they have like at least on the Ama ships, they have the ability to like pull out or pull in a sunshade, so you could sit there on the top deck if you wanted.
Exactly.
But I didn't
exactly.
I wanted people to get a sense of the scale and size here a little bit of these ships, so you can get a sense.
This is really really helpful, and the top deck. So that's the other thing. Again, every ship has a top deck. Has a sun deck, right? And some have like kind of a designated walking track around it. You'd probably have to walk 20 times or more to get a mile. I don't know. This one has a putt-putt course. Some have a hot tub or a pool. A couple of the ships have pools that are enclosed more on their second, like third deck, below the sun deck. Oftentimes there's a grill up there or a big green egg where they can do, in nice weather, they can do a cookout. There can be a bar, there's shade, there's giant chests. It just all varies based on the ship. But you can see, as Brian pointed out, the width. And one of the things we did when we were touring all these ships was kind of like stand outside of one room. And my husband, who has a longer, arm length than me, would see like, okay, can I touch, like how wide is this hallway? And thinking about the perspective of the layout of the rooms, are they wider, are they deeper? and there's definitely a difference, even the hallways being quite narrow. So
well, let's pull up. You also sent us a photo of a couple of the rooms, and I think this is a good one because they do advertise these rooms with French balconies, and Amma had an
And-
interesting setup where it was like a half French balcony and a half like, I don't know what they called it, like an actual balcony, but the French balcony was actually like fully enclosed. Yeah.
So
yeah,
usually when they call it a French balcony, it's really a sliding glass door that just opens, but you're still sitting in your cabin. So it's not even, on some ships there might be like 6 inches to actually step out onto, but usually a French balcony is considered like a slider versus a true step out balcony. Again, you have to pick the right stateroom. Amma has staterooms that have both, that have a step out and the French. I stayed in a room just with a French. But one of the other things, if you think about, Brian, if you go to the other picture showing the ships side by side,
yep,
you might have that French balcony, and instead of the view of the water when you're in port, you're looking into the next ship.
Yep.
Because if you see this is how ships tend to, port throughout Europe.
And this is accurate. It's 3, it could even be 4, but generally 2 or 3 is the most common is probably 2 or 3. There might be days you might be the only ship in a port and then you won't have to raft, but this is super, super common. And especially in the major cities, there'll be 30 ships and they're all rafted.
Exactly. And if you think about it, so, where we were in Amsterdam, there were 13 ships. So there were 3, and then in front of these, you can't see it in the picture, but there were another 3 and then another 3. And important to note that if you're in that back row, absolutely nothing wrong with that. You actually, if you're on the right side of the ship, you get to have a little view while you're still in port. No big deal. But to get off the ship, you have to climb up to the sun deck. Typically, they have kind of like a gangway that connects across those sun decks that we were seeing. And you're going to cross over the ships, and then you're going to go down. So in this case, you would go down inside the Amasarina and then exit. And this is very common. You're going to be walking through, across, in, over, up and down stairs through other cruise lines that might not even be the same company as yours. And that is just how it goes.
Well,
it's very different.
I think it's really cool because you actually get to see what does the lobby of a different ship look like.
Yeah, but to Karen's point, it struck me because our rafting, we would basically tie up different cruise lines and we would walk through the atriums of each, just down the middle of the atriums. Probably because it was winter, to be perfectly honest. But what struck me is, well, geez, the reason all these cruise ships have to look exactly alike is because they'll have to line up kind of perfectly when they're rafted so that you can get through, right? So they all had the atrium in the same space. The lounges all looked about the same size, right? And so it was interesting. It was kind of a forcing function, this rafting, to put the spaces on the ship, I think. So, yeah. So, Karen, you mentioned, so we talked a little about rooms, talked a little bit about the spaces. I do want to go back to Alan's question about activities on board. I would frame this as most of the action is not on the ship. It's they're getting you off the ship. Even on the ABD, they had a couple of nights where they took us out to do things. So in Salzburg, I think they had an activity to take, some of the guests could choose to go see an opera, not Salzburg, in Vienna. You could go see an opera, and the rest of us got taken to a wine bar, basically. Although it was
orchestra concert, but yes,
orchestra concert, yes. And the rest of us got taken to a wine bar, but not like a wine bar here in the U.S. It was drinking carafes of wine as much as you could and eating bread.
Kind of activity. It felt more like a beer hall, but it was with wine.
But wine.
Yeah,
but wine.
Yeah.
So my sense is they want you they bring you to a destination. They want you to go experience the destination, not the nightlife isn't on board the ship; it's off the ship kind of thing. Is that your experience, Karen?
Absolutely. I mean, there's some times where you are sailing at night, and I think every cruise line has some degree of entertainment, right? So it may just be as simple as a piano player, that might have kind of a multi-instrument, synth setup, and, might be doing some DJing. And depending on the ship, that same setup could turn into a dance party. It could turn into like a white night party, or a 70s party. Taup put on some really fun parties. It's just, it just really varies. There could be karaoke. We did karaoke on our ABD.
Oh, so
Um,
fun.
or they could bring on local entertainers. And I know that AMA does that. I think most of the cruise lines tend to do that. Again, not every night. It really depends. We had some great entertainment on Tauc most recently. Really, really talented, like singers, like trios kinds of things, singing a mixture of all different kinds of I think they were is it usually the three tenors? So they were
Mhm.
the four, they were at the tenor. What's the other?
The
The
basses, the
Altos?
four
baritones,
altos or whatever.
altos, baritone,
Or
probably baritone. Well, if
four
it was men,
baritones. It
it
was
would,
the four.
yeah.
They were
If it
the
was men,
four
it would be
baritones.
baritones, yeah, or basses, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
They were the four baritones, and they were really fun. It was an interactive. They kind of moved around the lounge. They sang everything from classical opera to ABBA, and I was actually really surprised at how fun it was. We've seen dancing on board, and so the 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 vibe is very different. It's like I like to compare it for those folks that have sailed in concierge on Disney. I like to compare it to like the concierge lounge
Yeah.
experience. It's like
Yeah.
everybody on board is a concierge cruiser, and everybody's hanging out in the lounge together or hanging out up on the sun deck. It's like that. It's like you make friends, hopefully,
Mm-hmm.
or hang out with who you're traveling with. It's a more intimate, laid back experience. But people tend to go to bed earlier because they're going to have a full day the next day.
And you're exhausted
Absolutely.
from the day you just had. Like that was the other thing. Like you'd get
You're
back and you'd have a drink
exhausted,
and dinner.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
and there aren't
Right. So
things
there's not going to
like
be a movie theater. There's not going to be
right,
a casino. It's just a different experience.
right.
It's not a Royal Caribbean adventure cruise. It's not even on Adventures
Yeah.
by Disney. Mickey does not come on board.
And there's
There's
not
not
like
characters.
trivia going on in the middle of the day or telefolding classes. Like that just doesn't even on Adventures by
Right.
Disney on AMA, that kind of stuff doesn't exist, but
Yeah. You
it's
had
fine.
some
You're
cookie
so
decorating.
busy. Yeah, we
Yeah.
did ginger, we went on
Yes.
a Christmas
While we were
market
sailing.
cruise. So
While we were sailing on the
while we
river.
were
Yeah.
sailing, there were a couple of different days where you could sign up for cookie decorating that was in the room where the chef's table was done. So like there are some activities, but there's not a lot of like filled activities because you honestly don't have time for them. And as Karen mentioned, it does tend to be a little earlier to go to bed. Not early. I mean, there are people that are still staying up till 11 or midnight, but they're not like partying the night away, generally speaking, because you're getting up at like 7 a.m. to get breakfast and then you're off the ship by
Well,
like 8:30 or 9 to go
Right.
touring.
well, and they don't have the crew complement on these ships to do the
That's
kinds of
true.
stuff that Disney does
Yeah.
on its ships all the
Or than
time. Like,
any large cruise line.
yeah, we had
does, yeah.
we took the count. It was like there were like 4 to 5 dining room servers total, and I think that included 2 assistant servers. So like there's not a lot of like added space for more crew to come on. So that's why, the entertainment tended to be we've brought 2 people on in the port we're in. They're going to do a little entertainment and then they're getting off because we don't have any room for them to stay.
Right.
So yeah.
And what's really interesting about the crew that we've noticed is that the crew might have multifunction, right? So they
Right.
might be serving in the dining room, but then they might be your cabin attendant, your stateroom
Oh, wow.
attendant, or somebody that's a stateroom attendant might also be the masseuse on board, or the bartender in the lounge will definitely also be like helping with the bar service
Yes.
downstairs in the dining room. So they're working hard in multiple roles, but there's not like a private island that they're going to go work at. When you're off the ship.
Speaking of that and the crew and how hard they work, I want to ask about tipping because I know on
Right.
large ship cruising we talk about tipping usually, well, it's not included, but you can prepay obviously, so they sort of can tell you what you're going to pay, or they give you an idea of what you're going to pay. I know on our ABD it was included, right? We didn't like pay. There was no tipping at the end. Everything was all included in the price. Is that typical in the river cruising industry, or is it more typical to actually like hand cash to people, or what is typical, I guess?
So again an important distinction because um, Adventures by Disney and Talc Bridges River Cruising both are fully inclusive, door to door, transfers included, and all of your gratuities for everyone. Most of the river cruises, they do have like an auto gratuity or a suggested gratuity, but it is not included. And you can sometimes prepay it and sometimes you cannot. Again, it depends on the river cruise line and their setup. And I think it has something to do with currency, because it's just how they pay, and they want you to pay like in euros, for example, when you're there. So you still might be able to charge it, but it's going to charge your card in euros versus like they can't pre-charge it. So it really depends. Avalon lets you prepay. We have an offer right now with Avalon for some dates where we can include complimentary gratuities for our clients. So again, it's really very specific to each ship, to each cruise line.
Well, we can't talk cruising, I say this all the time, without talking about food. I'll say our
Thank
experience
you.
on Ama
Is
was
anybody watching
yeah.
for anything other than talking
Yeah.
about food? Let's be
Well,
honest.
we got some other questions
I
we'll
know
get
we
to here
do.
at the end with Karen,
I'm teasing. Yeah.
yeah. So I mean, our experience with Ama was the food was fantastic. I thought it was really, really good. Better than
Except the hamburgers. Nathan's hamburger was gross.
yeah,
but
well,
other
hockey
than
pucks,
that-
but yeah,
Yeah.
but I thought it was as good as, probably better than main dining on Disney. Probably, getting some of the food we had was getting pretty close to Palo level, especially the chef's table food that we had. Does that translate across? Are there lines that are known for their food and lines to avoid for food, or is the food generally good? Like, what's your impression of the food, Karen?
I mean, I think there's a great deal of variability. Riverside, for example, was just named the best river ship in Europe for foodies by Forbes. And they are really striving to be like the foodie ship. When I ate on Riverside, I thought the food was very, very great. Did it blow me away? Not necessarily, but there was some really good offerings. Talc was just like, they blew me away.
Your
I
pictures of the
was
Talc
so
food. Oh my God.
The Talc meals were so incredible. They had so many options to choose from. And most of the cruise lines do have kind of a standard, like every day you could get a steak or a grilled fish or Caesar salad, and Talc has that too. But their just general variety that you could get on any given day was incredible. And then they do like a brunch at least once a cruise that
wow.
just was phenomenal, where you could still order some things off the menu, but they had a tremendous buffet, and they had a crepe station with like made to order crepes. But then if you're gluten free, like my husband is now, they accommodated him with gluten-free crepes. So I mean, it was just really great. In the lounge, they also had some great offerings. Like before dinner, one day they had fresh oysters and champagne with caviar.
Oh, wow.
I mean, just really fun things. And then, as I said, like on Talc, they have the all-day casual dining, hot dogs, hamburgers, soft pretzels.
So you can have your hamburger, hot dog, soft pretzel with your glass of Veuve, right?
Absolutely.
Because that's my style.
Absolutely. You know how I'm all about the French fries. It's about the French fries and the champagne. That's perfect. That's perfect. You do have to. There is variability on the reports that we get from food. I mean, food is a very subjective thing, but in terms of the variety that's offered, and I also want to always point out about allergies, because especially for our Disney cruisers, allergies is a frequent concern, and that's one of the reasons that people travel with Disney. I think that AMA has done, especially when you're traveling with Adventures by Disney on board AMA, They do a great job. Nothing compared to Tauk. When we looked at all the dining rooms on 13 ships, Tauk had on every menu at every meal about 10 different allergies labeled. Like, I didn't even know there were that many
Wow.
things to be allergic to. And they had it across the bottom of every menu, like all the things, and then each one had a number, and then every menu item was like, well, this one is 1 and 2, this one is 3 and 4. And then you could talk to them and say, well, can you make it this way? And
Right. I have a
so
soy
they did a great
allergy
job
and a
with that.
gluten allergy. Can I do this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Exactly.
CT's saying food is important. Yes, it is.
Yes,
It's always
very
important. I wanted to say one of the other benefits. I thought. Well, I want to pick up on the allergy thing. I will say the one place that ABD seemed to struggle on our cruise was not on board. It was out in the wild, and I think that that's just different levels of
just-
understanding around food allergies in different places that you're going. So I would just say that was a place where we saw them struggling. There was a poor woman who I think didn't get lunch one day practically because
she did.
She ended up
But
getting
like-
it, but it was like
but it
yeah.
just took a lot longer because
Yeah.
there was some kind of miscommunication, and so they didn't know, and they didn't have anything ready for her, so they had to make. They were great. They made her something. This was it was like a beer hall. They made her something, and it ended up being all fine, but it meant she ate,
we had schnitzel, and they made her an unbreaded
Yes, they
schnitzel.
made her
That's what she
unbreaded
needed, but they like
schnitzel.
could not fathom
Right.
like why you would want unbreaded schnitzel.
right.
But
I mean, I can't fathom why anybody
And
would
you-
want unbreaded schnitzel either, but not.
And you
allergy
have to be
approved.
proactive. So we were going to do a food tour, and we were going to do it no matter. And we kind of knew it probably wasn't going to be celiac friendly, but we talked to them and they said, hey, if you want, we can actually like pack you like a picnic lunch,
Oh,
to take.
fantastic. Yeah.
And we ended up not doing that because it was a food tour between like breakfast and lunch anyway. So, and it turned
So
out
we're
there
gonna be
were some
full.
food options.
Yeah.
So it was fine. But I think if you're proactive, you can make it work. You just have to be aware, not assume that when you go out, like you said, Brian, into the wild, that there's always going to be somebody that understands and translates and has an option for you.
Yeah.
I did want to call out on the food side, like one, I think, really nice thing about river cruising, which was the food on board the ship was great, but because you're in these cities, there were times we got lunch at some fabulous places in these cities. Like you could have gone back to the ship and had a meal. Like you said, Karen, all the meals are covered. If you're on the ship, you can get food. But if you want to experience local cuisine, like we would just get tips from the concierge or the ABD guides, and they'd send us to some fabulous restaurants where we could get local food that was really, really, really good. So I think that's on ocean
Yes.
cruising. I think some of these stops, I mean, it's hit or miss. You can find some good tacos in Ensenada, right? For sure. But the food, experiencing the local food and the cuisine, I felt like was much easier to do on a river cruise. So I got
I
a
agree.
couple of
And
questions.
again, as part of the the excursions might include a lunch or a dinner or a food tour off ship. So there's so many opportunities.
I've got one question for you, Karen, and then I want to get to some listener questions that kind of tie into some of the last few questions I have. But the one thing I wanted to ask about, I think we've heard a lot in the news about river levels of late. And like when we sailed in December, the river was actually too high, which I didn't know was a thing, but it was too high. And so some of the ships were stuck because they couldn't get under the bridges because the river levels were too high. I think more often what we're hearing is in the summertime, the river levels can get too low. And then, they're busing you between ports potentially or moving you between ships. Like, did they at this conference you were at, did they have anything to say about that? Or what's your experience with that? Should people be concerned about that?
I don't think it's a concern any more than,
Hurricane season.
there's occasional
Pirates.
Exactly. Took the words
Yeah.
out of my mouth. Like occasionally there's weather, right? So does it happen? Yes. Is it an inconvenience? Yes. We don't want your river cruise to turn into a bus tour. And so, sailing on a cruise line that has a good backup plan is important. Knowing that sometimes, things happen and they make the best of it. Any of the cruise lines that we work with as an agency, we know will make things right and try to take care of their guests as best as possible. if they know, ahead of time that there's going to be an issue, then typically they allow for you to reschedule or alternate, whatever. Sometimes things just happen out of the blue, and then they do have to kind of, take you off and move you, by bus past the point and put you on. Sometimes they can move the ship without the passengers on. Sometimes they put you on a different ship. So it just really varies. I would say, just like with anything, don't let that stop you. Climate change means that we can't predict. It's not like I can say
Yeah.
that it's going to happen, more likely in August, but not in May. We just don't know. But
Yeah.
I think overall, it's still worth it to go and just hope for the best.
Yeah, and I'm joking about pirates, folks.
Yeah, I got to pull this up because CT is giving you. Yeah,
No,
we had
I'm
to
joking.
fend off pirates on the river. No, that did not
There's
happen.
no
Sam.
there's no pirates in European river cruise. You don't need to worry about that.
So-
Yeah.
So let me pull up a few of the listener questions that I think we can answer and probably weave in some of our own questions. Before I do that,
There's a couple
completely
of
missed.
comments. Yeah.
Yeah,
there's a
I
couple of great
completely
comments,
missed
too.
this comment, Karen, that I wanted to be sure to give you, which CT's paying you the compliment that you're one of his favorite guests, and great to see you back on the show. We love having Karen
Appreciate
on. We
that.
love having Karen on.
Appreciate that
all right,
so much.
I want to roll through a few of these questions here. So a few folks have sort of asked, what's your favorite river cruising itinerary? And so, yeah, I was going to phrase this as like, if you're a newbie to this, if you're looking for a river cruise, what's your
what's a
favorite,
first river
what's your
cruise? Yeah.
recommended, and maybe what's the hidden gem for those people who are like, I want to go off the beaten path.
Sure. So I mean, I definitely think that the Danube and the Rhine are like kind of, Eastern/Western Caribbean itineraries, right?
But I cannot say enough
It was
about that
great,
sail into Budapest. I mean, it was
Yeah.
gorgeous. You have to see it once.
So
yeah.
beautiful at night. Seeing that at night is just amazing. And you know what? My hidden tip, my tip in Budapest is you got to go do the thermal bath, especially if you start your cruise there, land in Budapest, go do the thermal bath, then get on the ship. So Rhine and Danube, I think are great. I think that Seine is also popular. Again, some of it is like, for example, on Ama, we talked about the connecting rooms and rooms for triples. Ama does not have that on the Seine, so it's only on the Rhine and the Danube. So all these different considerations. Portugal is, I think, is on my very high on my list to river cruise next. It is selling out into 25. There's some itineraries out for 26 already, depending on the cruise line. Portugal has a rule that all those ships need to be built in Portugal. So there's a bunch of new ships that were purpose built for Portugal that are just gorgeous. And then the thing that the itinerary that I keep hearing is like life-changing is Southeast Asia, to river cruise in Southeast Asia. That, again, that's a big trip. And then there's just so many little ones. We just had clients book kind of the lower Danube from Budapest to Bucharest. And so that's, a more unique itinerary. And then there's just all these little different branches of the Rhine you can take. You can take the Rhone, which is a great one if you're into wine. There's just, there's a lot to do. Just like oceans, there are the rivers, they continue to expand river cruising, and lots of great options.
Love
Yeah,
it.
for
love
sure.
It. Somebody is asking. We got a great question.
I want to.
this
I'll
is
roll
a
through
good
the
one.
questions, Sam. I got you covered.
Okay.
I got you covered. So Lori's asking, what do people wear to dinner? I'll say, on the ABD, there wasn't like a strict dress code, but it was winter, so everyone was like in pants and shirts and sweaters and that kind of thing. Yeah, I don't know
This
how
is
it
a
would be in the
summer
summer.
cruise.
Yeah, so I'm curious, like what the
people
dress
in
code
the
is like.
summer,
Do you think?
I mean, we sailed on ABD in the summer, and I think that many people changed for dinner, but it was because after a day of touring, you're kind of like sweaty and, maybe wanted to just freshen up. But people were not wearing, fancy clothes. It was definitely like golf shirts and khaki pants or shorts. It's pretty like what you would go out to dinner, maybe not at Disney parks, but what you would, if you were going out to dinner in your hometown, for a decent dinner, but not coat and tie or anything like
Yeah.
that.
And
Yeah.
you don't
And there was a range,
people,
and with
yeah, I'm
kids,
sure
it's
people,
kids. I mean,
yeah,
Yeah.
I'm sure the kids are wearing their t-shirts and their shorts, and like I would guess a lot
and there
of the
was
women
no
want to
dress
put on a
code.
sundress, but you don't have to, right? There's
Right,
no, yeah,
exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, these ships are. I just want to say these ships are elegant, right? I mean, they will support if you really want to put on a coat and tie, you can do it. I felt most people were at sort of the business casual level throughout the day, on at least on our cruise. So, but yeah, you wouldn't have been out of place if you
Right.
were
Now,
in less.
now Tauk, for example, Tauk does these things called sparkling evenings, and they're mostly on like their regular itineraries, not necessarily on the bridges ones, but those are like, we had a private, like the museum where the girl with the pearl earring is displayed. We had a private event at that museum.
Mhm.
And the museum was shut down except for us, and they had this
Yep.
gorgeous dinner there. And that, people tend to get a little dressier when you're having dinner in a private event like that, or a palace or whatever. But if you're going to dinner in Vienna, if you're going to Vienna to the orchestra
Yes,
performance or whatever it was,
that
you
was
might want to
dressy.
dress for the occasion.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they actually
That
noted in the excursion that they wanted people to dress nicely for that. So yeah,
Yeah,
they did
yeah.
note
Right.
that. Yeah,
But I mean, to your point, Karen, people are running around in the summertime, especially running around as tourists all day. You're going to be hot and sweaty. You're probably you might want to shower and change for dinner, but you don't have to be dressed up.
Right.
Come as you are is totally fine. Very similar
And
to
I think I should point out is that they adjust the time for dinner. There is one seating for dinner, and usually, depending on the ship, I've noticed a difference. Some ships prefer everybody to really come when they say it's dinner. They prefer everybody to come around that same time, and the time will adjust each day based on the itinerary of the day. Other ships prefer not for everybody to show up at once, as to not put as much strain on the kitchen. And another thing to note, it's open seating. You can sit
Yep.
different places every night. It's another big difference versus
you can sit with
like
different
an ocean
people.
cruise.
Yeah, you can sit.
Although-
I mean,
Exactly.
Although no one wanted to eat with us on our ABD trip. We couldn't get anyone to sit with us. We'd go pick these big tables,
Well-
and there would just be three of us. I'm like, what is going on here?
it was.
But yeah,
To be fair, there were a lot of larger. Well, one, there's a lot of
I
like
am-
four
I am
tops
j- I'm
and a lot of
joking.
larger
I'm joking.
families. So yeah,
I'm
it's,
joking.
But
I want to
everybody's
pull up.
very social in the lounge. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. I want to pull up this comment. How does pricing compare? I'm just gonna preempt this by saying it probably varies wildly depending on cruise line, stateroom type, all of that stuff.
Itinerary.
And that's why you should reach out to Karen and the folks at My Path Unwinding Travel, because they can help you navigate that. So they're helping us navigate that actually right now. So just reach out to Karen. You can head to mypathunwinding.com
Absolutely.
at
/
DCL Duo. DCL Duo, so she knows we sent you, or email. I think it's DCLDuo at mypathunwinding.com, and they will hook you up. So yeah, the prices vary wildly because I've been pricing some river cruises ourselves. So the other one I wanted to pull up here, there's two kind of related comments here. It's like, we're really curious about river cruising, hard to compare to the Disney Magic. And then another one was, you're wondering if Karen would recommend a river cruise over a large ship for the first time European cruiser. So just, put it on the table, Karen, like if you're headed to Europe, or if you were, really wedded to large ship cruising, like I think we've talked about some of the differences, but, what's your recommendation here in terms of how you think about steering someone to the direction of a river cruise versus, a big ocean cruise?
I think a lot of it depends on the personality of the people that you're traveling with. When we had our first European experience with our family, that was actually our first Disney cruise of any kind. And we chose it because we didn't choose it because it was Disney. We chose it because it was the Magic, and it wasn't a mega ship. And we liked the size of it for going through Europe, but we also liked the idea of, when we spent a day walking through Rome or Barcelona or whatever it was, that when we came back on the ship, we knew our kids would be happy, because we weren't sure if they'd be happy
In Europe,
in,
right?
in Europe, but we knew that they'd come back on the ship and have fun, right?
Right. And
And
they'd
so
have
we thought
mac
it
and
would be a good
cheese and burgers and hot dogs and all of
exactly.
that. Yeah.
So- right. So, and then as they got older, then we took the more immersive, like we did the Central Europe Adventures by Disney land cruise, which, there was no, you know, shows or kids club to come back to, but the hotels had pools and the kids had fun swimming in the evenings together and the adventure guides did fun things together with them. So there was still some fun. On a river cruise, I think again, it's knowing the personalities and the interests of your who's in your group. If your kids need those bells and whistles, then the river cruise is probably not going to be for them yet because there's not a water slide. There's a pool, but it's kind of like on Ama. I would say the pool is
It's like
maybe
a.
twice the size of a hot tub,
I was
right?
just say it's like an
Maybe the size of
oversized
a
hot
hot tub
tub.
on Disney.
Yeah.
Right, right. And they do fun things for the kids, especially on Adventures by Disney or Talc Bridges. They make it really relatable for the kids, but there's not going to be, all the bells and whistles. So you have to think about how do you want to introduce your kids to Europe? There's some great, great excursions and activities that are age appropriate that you all saw on your river
Yep.
cruise, and
Absolutely.
ABD has them and Talc has them that really make it age appropriate, relatable, fun for all ages. But, the kids need to, it's more of the example that I just heard recently that I love is this is a vacation. It's a vacation with your kids versus a vacation for your kids.
Oh, that's a
Yeah.
great
And
phrasing. Yes.
I love that. It was used recently in a completely different context, but I think it fits here too.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I actually want to
I
ask for a second about that the ABD point. So like, we did the ABD River Cruise, and I'll be honest. Now I've done one, and I know what it's about. Right, my adventurous side of my travel persona is kicking in. I'm like, do I need ABD? I could probably just book with Ama myself. Is would you how would you think about that, Karen, in terms of folks looking at, well, I want to do a river cruise. Should I go ABD or should I just book with a river cruise line directly? Is it really about, do they have kids in tow, or is there something more there that you would point people to with ABD?
So remember that ABD does have some adult only
True.
dates. So
Yeah.
it's not just about traveling with your kids. Disney has a, very strong sense of security, safety, familiarity, and service, that's just comes with traveling with
Mhm.
Disney. The adventure guides are really the secret sauce to Adventures by Disney. When we did the Central Europe ABD, it was land. And then they started talking about the Danube. And I've talked about before how I was part of this focus group where they were introducing the concept of a river cruise. And everybody in the focus group was like, no way, this is not going to work. But you know what? By the time they rolled all the details and shared all the details with us about how they were going to, set it up, we all were like, sign us up, we want to go. And then I did get to go. And the adventure guides with Adventures by Disney they make a difference, right? They are like the cruise director staff on board. They're your, everything. And they go out. This is a difference. They go out on the excursions with you.
Yes.
Talc
True.
also has a tour team, like a cruise team that go out with you.
Right.
When you sail on Ama without ABD, and when you sail on the other cruise lines, except Talc has this, but if we sail on the others, people from the cruise line do not go out on the excursions with you. It's more like, they set you up and you meet the local guide and away you go. But nobody from Viking,
Right.
for example, is going to be with you.
Yeah, there's less hand holding, I would say, right? Like, so it's
Yeah.
it's the different, and hand holding it sounds like I'm talking about it in a negative way. I'm not. There are a lot of American
Well, it's white
travelers
glove
who-
service.
right,
It's white
who
glove
like
service,
that,
not
right,
hand
who
holding.
like that handoff. That's a really clear handoff. Now, I'm with this tour person, and now I'm with this tour person, and this is the person I follow, and I don't have to plan anything, and I can just, as long as I follow this flag or this sign or paddle of power,
Right. And
I
there's
have
still like Viking is still going to have the flag
right.
or the sign or the representative or the little whisper box where you have the headphones in so you can listen to your guide and follow along. They're all going to have that, but they're not going to have somebody from, the ship with you, which offers that continuity and that shared experience, because then when you come back on board, then you talk about it and you talk about what's going to happen tomorrow, and there's an extra level of just customer service and relationship building that happens on those higher end cruise lines because of that. I think there's just a difference.
Well, it's like an ocean going excursion, frankly. Like Disney gets you out the door and on the dock, and then they hand you off
They
to
hand you
the
off
tour
to
provider, and then you don't see anyone from Disney again until you get
That's
back. So
exactly right. And they're still in touch, but you're not there with them. Versus when you're on an ABD or a Tauck itinerary, they are there with you. And with Tauck, they're so all inclusive that they might actually be handing you euros on the bus for lunch so that you don't have to
Yeah.
spend any money there.
yeah,
So
yeah.
Well, and the other part that is, good if you want this is, like, if you have a question or you scrape your knee and you need a Band-Aid, like, they're Johnny on the spot right there to help you answer your question, to get you whatever you need, right? So that's, it is that higher level of service. If you're somebody who doesn't need that and who wants to venture off on your own, maybe one of the other lines that is less inclusive is a better option. So it's really, I think you're
right.
right. What personality
One
do
of
you
one
have
of
in
the
the
examples
family?
that we've talked about, yeah, one of the examples that we've talked about with Adventures by Disney, and it's true for Tauck, is the restrooms in Europe. You usually have to have a euro and when you're with those brands, they're going to make sure that they have the euros for you. You don't have to worry about that. It's covered. You just say Adventures by Disney, or you just say, I'm here with Tauck, and they just tally it and you're good. And they, take care of it. If you're with another river cruise line, you may have to dig in your pocket for the euro. So, it's just these little things that, everybody has to decide where do they find value in the experience.
See, I can already tell the wheels are spinning in Sam's head about whether we should do that AMA cruise or go with Tauck. So you're doing your job here,
I
Karen,
know,
really,
you
really
are,
well.
Karen.
Too
You're
well.
really,
Too
I
well for
know.
me. Which, speaking of, so as we wrap up here, remind folks how they can get a hold of you and your team, because you guys are experts in this stuff in a way that I could only have imagined. So how can folks find you, Karen, if they want to explore an opportunity river cruise or even book one?
Awesome. So like you said before, you can get to mypathunwinding.com / is it DCL Duo, just so that we know that you are a listener. DCL Duo at mypathunwinding.com. We are on Facebook at My Path Unwinding Travel, Instagram, My Path Unwinding Travel. We do have some great offers right now. We have a standing offer for a discount on Adventures by Disney, which has river cruises through 2025. Tauck has river cruises through 2025 as well. And we have an offer where we can include a complimentary pre or post night on Tauck. If you are new to Tauck, or if you're not new to Tauck, we can still offer that, but you have to book by I think by the end of July for 2025. And we can do that also for any Tauck itinerary, not just river cruises. I mentioned Avalon. We have some itineraries. We have complimentary gratuities. Viking, we have $200 to $400 off per person. On the waterways, we have a 5% discount on virtually anything. And if somebody really wants to sail badly on the waterways this summer, we can double that to 10% for July and August. So we have, coming back from this conference, afforded us a lot of options and incentives for our clients. So this is the time to book for 2025 and some itineraries already into 2026.
That's awesome.
Awesome. Well, as I said, we're exploring a river cruise, not for this year, but for next year. And we will definitely be leveraging Karen and her team. And I wanted to put up a couple of final comments here. CT, you're more than welcome. We love talking river cruising because it opened our eyes to a whole new type of vacationing that we liked. It's very different than ocean cruising. I just want to be upfront about that, but we loved it. And Tracy here is saying we love our My Path Unwinding travel agent. So some kudos to you and your team, Karen, over there.
I think that's a kudos to Chelsea. I believe Chelsea is her.
Yeah.
It is a kudos to Chelsea, and we love our clients. We appreciate everybody listening, and it's so easy talking to you guys. It's been I can't believe it's been 75 minutes here, but thank you. It's always goes by so quickly, and thanks everybody for listening in for this whole time.
Yep. And just as a reminder, we will be back next week. We will have Jason Leppert from Popular Cruising, which if you have not heard Jason before, he was on one of our very early episodes. He is a huge Disney Cruise Line fan, has sailed on just tons of Disney cruises, but also just a big general cruising fan. And so love having him on to talk about how Disney fits into the larger cruising space. And I think we'll probably get some speculation in with Jason about what's going to be on the Destiny and some of these other ships. So stay tuned for that next week, 5:30 p.m. Pacific, 8:30 p.m. Eastern. We will be back. But for now, thank you everyone out there for watching. We really, really appreciate it.
Good.